sometimes the truth escapes in ways we least expect. In the quiet town of Asher, Oklahoma, a chilling event unfolded that would forever alter its serene landscape. On December 5, 2012, the community was shaken by the murder of 18-year-old Genaro Sanchez, a crime that left investigators grasping for answers. The case took an unexpected turn when the perpetrator, Jared Murray, inadvertently revealed his guilt, leading to a confession that stunned everyone involved. Asher, a small town nestled in the heart of Oklahoma, was known for its close-knit community and tranquil surroundings. Residents prided themselves on their tight bonds and the sense of security that permeated their daily lives. However, beneath this peaceful exterior, a harrowing incident was about to unfold, revealing the fragility of the town's calm facade. On that fateful December day, Genaro Sanchez, a freshman at East Central University, was reported missing. His sudden disappearance left friends and family in a state of confusion and fear. As the search intensified, the community's unease grew, with each passing hour amplifying the urgency to find the missing teenager. The investigation took a startling turn when Jared Murray, a fellow student, was brought in for questioning. During the interrogation, Murray's demeanor and statements raised suspicions. In a moment of unforeseen candor, he inadvertently disclosed details that only the perpetrator could know, leading to a confession that would unravel the mystery surrounding Genaro's tragic fate. This is the story of how a seemingly ordinary individual, through an unintended admission, exposed the dark truth behind a heinous act. Join us as we delve into the events that led to the accidental confession of a killer and the impact it had on a community forever changed. Genaro Sanchez was just 18 years old, a young man with a promising future ahead of him. Known to his friends as a kind and gentle soul, Genaro had a way of making others feel comfortable. His friends described him as someone you could trust, a person who never hesitated to lend a hand or listen when others needed to talk. He was a freshman at East Central University, excited about the journey he was just beginning, eager to explore what life had to offer beyond the confines of his small town. Genaro's family, like so many others, had big dreams for him. He was their hope, their joy, a son who they believed would one day make a meaningful impact on the world. To them, he was a light, someone who brought warmth into their lives. His sudden disappearance sent shockwaves through his family and friends, casting a shadow over what had once been a close-knit circle of loved ones. They clung to hope, but with each passing hour that hope began to fade, replaced by a growing dread they couldn't ignore. Then there was Jared Murray, a fellow freshman at East Central University, and the last person known to have seen Genaro alive. Murray had a markedly different personality from Genaro. He was often described as quiet, withdrawn, and a bit of an enigma to those who knew him. His interactions with others were minimal, and when he did speak, there was an unsettling edge to his words, an intensity that made people uncomfortable. Some classmates noted that he was fascinated with dark topics, and his behavior at times seemed unpredictable. He was an observer watching the world with a certain detachment that in hindsight seemed almost chilling. Jared's background didn't offer many clues about who he was or what drove him. Growing up in a relatively quiet environment, he led a life that outwardly appeared unremarkable, yet there was an undercurrent to his personality that was difficult to define. He didn't have close friends, and most of those around him kept their distance. In his college dorm, he was more of a shadow than a presence, someone whose absence was rarely noticed and whose company was seldom sought. Asher, Oklahoma, where both young men had grown up, was a town that seemed untouched by the fast-paced chaos of the outside world. Here life moved a bit slower, and people took pride in the peace and security that permeated their daily lives. It was a place where everyone knew each other, where the community was like an extended family. Neighbors helped neighbors, and news traveled quickly through word of mouth or at the local diner. For the people of Asher, the idea of violence, especially something as brutal as murder, felt alien, unthinkable. This was a place that cherished its quiet existence, where crime was low and trust was high. Genaro's disappearance shattered this sense of security. The town found itself gripped by fear, the kind of fear that creeps into your bones and won't let go. People began locking their doors, looking over their shoulders, questioning strangers, and wondering who could be responsible for such a heinous act. Whispers filled the local stores and coffee shops. The idea that one of their own could be behind such a brutal crime was both disturbing and surreal. For a community that prided itself on its harmony, the revelation of a potential killer within their ranks was a hard pill to swallow. As the investigation moved forward, More questions than answers surfaced. Who would want to harm Gennaro, a young man with no known enemies, no involvement in dangerous activities? The idea that he could simply vanish without a trace seemed improbable, yet no clues pointed to where he might be until Jared Murray became a person of interest. As details began to emerge, it became clear that the town of Asher was about to confront a darkness it had never known. It was a cold December evening in 2012, and Gennaro Sanchez had no idea that the ride he'd accepted from his classmate would be his last. According to friends, the two weren't particularly close, but Jared had offered Gennaro a lift to a nearby town. Gennaro, always trusting, accepted. He likely never suspected that this simple act would lead him down a path from which he would never return. As the night settled in, the two young men drove through the back roads of rural Oklahoma, the car headlights cutting through the dark, empty landscape. It was an eerily silent journey, one that would later become central to an investigation that no one in this quiet community could have anticipated. In the early hours of December 6th, Gennaro Sanchez was officially reported missing. His family, consumed with worry, reached out to friends and anyone who might have seen him. They searched the roads, the university, and nearby towns, hoping he had simply lost his way. But as hours turned into days, hope began to dwindle. The community rallied, joining search parties that combed through fields, forests, and highways, but there was no sign of Gennaro. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Then, something curious happened. Word began to spread among the students at East Central University, stories of strange conversations, unsettling comments that Jared Murray had made to some of his classmates. Students recalled instances where Jared had spoken about dark fantasies, and while many had brushed off these remarks, they suddenly took on a chilling new context. On December 8th, law enforcement brought Jared Murray in for questioning, initially as a person who might help fill in the gaps. But as the questioning continued, Murray's behavior raised red flags. His responses were cold, detached, as though he were recounting events from a distance, rather than as a participant. Investigators noticed a shift in his tone, a peculiar calmness, as he described the moments leading up to Gennaro's last hours. In a shocking twist, Murray eventually admitted to his involvement. His confession came almost casually, as if he were revealing something inconsequential. Jared claimed that he had planned the murder for weeks, motivated by nothing more than a desire to see what it felt like to take another person's life. He described in chilling detail how he drove Gennaro out to a remote area and, without hesitation, took his life. As investigators absorbed his words, the full horror of the situation came into focus. Jared Murray had not acted in a moment of passion or out of rage. This was something far more calculated, deliberate. He admitted that he had lured Gennaro out under the pretense of offering him a ride, all the while fully intending to end his life. The reason? According to Murray, it was simply to know what it felt like. Law enforcement officials, many of whom had served for decades, were shaken by the sheer coldness of Jared's confession. They had encountered their share of violent crimes, but rarely had they heard such a detached, emotionless recounting of such a horrific act. The confession seemed almost surreal, as though it were being told by an observer rather than the perpetrator himself. After securing the confession, investigators returned to the scene Jared had described. It was there, in the middle of an open field, that they found Gennaro's body, discarded like an afterthought. The crime scene revealed little in the way of struggle. Gennaro had likely been taken by surprise, with no time to react. Fingerprints matching Jared's were found on the vehicle and near the scene, further corroborating his chilling account. Yet, despite the clarity of Jared's confession, there was one question that loomed over the investigation: why? Why would a young man with no prior history of violent behavior, someone who blended into the background, suddenly act on such dark impulses? In his statements to police, Jared remained indifferent, showing no remorse or guilt. He seemed almost fascinated by his own actions, as if he were observing a study of human nature from a distance. In the days that followed, the community struggled to make sense of this tragedy. Rumors swirled as neighbors speculated about Jared's motives, his upbringing, and any signs they might have missed. Friends who had once shared classes and dining hall tables with him were left haunted by the realization that they had known someone capable of such calculated cruelty. With the evidence gathered, fingerprints, Jared's confession, and the horrifying scene itself, the pieces of this tragic puzzle began to fit together. Yet, even as investigators closed the case, an unease lingered. The thought that such darkness could hide behind a seemingly ordinary face left an indelible mark on everyone involved. As news of Jenna-Rose's disappearance spread, the local police force in Asher, Oklahoma, quickly mobilized, launching a thorough investigation. The officers were well aware that time was critical in missing persons cases. The first 48 hours are the most crucial. They scoured the campus at East Central University, questioning students, friends, and faculty in hopes that someone could shed light on where Jenna-Rose might be. Despite their urgency, each lead seemed to end in frustration. The search was broad and intensive. Officers combed through fields, woods, and open land around the town, as well as routes between the university and the surrounding communities. Helicopters flew overhead, while volunteers from the community joined in, searching for any sign of the missing student. But despite their efforts, the investigation seemed to be going nowhere. Jenna-Rose's phone was turned off, and there were no sightings or bank transactions to trace his movements. Initially, law enforcement considered the possibility that Jenna-Rose might have left on his own. It was, after all, not entirely uncommon for young adults to disappear for a day or two without warning. But Jenna-Rose's friends and family were adamant this was not like him. He was reliable, grounded, and not one to vanish without a trace. As the hours passed, the theory that he had simply gone off on his own seemed increasingly unlikely. As investigators dug deeper, rumors started to surface around campus. Friends of Jenna-Rose recalled that he had last been seen with Jared Murray. At first, it seemed like an innocent enough detail, a friend giving another friend a ride. But the more the police learned about Jared, the more alarm bells began to ring. Students mentioned odd comments Jared had made in the past, hints at a fascination with darker topics. Some classmates even claimed that he had made unsettling remarks about violence, though at the time, most had brushed these off as odd but harmless. With no solid leads, police decided to bring Jared in for questioning. They weren't sure what to expect. For all they knew, he was just the last person to see Jenna-Rose alive, no more suspicious than anyone else. But from the moment Jared entered the interrogation room, investigators could sense that something was off. His demeanor was strangely calm, almost detached, as if he were discussing someone else's life, not his own actions. Throughout the questioning, Jared spoke with an eerie clarity, recounting details that only someone directly involved could know. He described the drive with Jenna-Rose, explaining that he'd taken him to a remote area on the pretense of hanging out somewhere away from the usual crowds. Detectives listened closely, picking up on the subtle ways in which Jared's story seemed rehearsed yet incomplete, as though he were hiding something but was unsure of how much to reveal. Then, almost without realizing it, Jared made a fatal mistake. He began describing details of the scene that investigators had not yet released to the public, specifics about the area where Jenna-Rose's body was found, the angle of the gunshot, the way Jenna-Rose had reacted. It was as if a switch had flipped. Jared, in a moment of twisted pride or perhaps carelessness, had accidentally confessed. His tone was casual, almost as though he were recounting a story he had read rather than a crime he had committed. At that moment, the investigation took a sharp turn. Detectives exchanged glances, realizing the gravity of what Jared had just said. They pressed him for more, asking follow-up questions to see if he'd continue. And he did, adding more details with each passing question, painting a picture of the crime in a way that only the killer could. With the confession in hand, police shifted their focus from searching for a missing person to building a case against Jared. They returned to the field where Jenna-Rose's body had been found, collecting forensic evidence that would corroborate Jared's account. Fingerprints, tire tracks, and traces of DNA all matched his story, further solidifying the case against him. In the days that followed, officers pored over Jared's background, hoping to uncover anything that might explain his motive. But instead of answers, they found only more questions. Jared had no history of violence, no apparent grudges, and no financial incentives. By all accounts, he was an ordinary student, someone who blended into the background, unnoticed by most of his peers. And yet, here he was, admitting to a crime with a level of detachment that disturbed even the most seasoned investigators. As the interrogation continued, Jared's attitude remained eerily composed. He spoke of the murder as if it were an experiment, a dark curiosity he felt compelled to satisfy. His lack of remorse, his chilling calmness, it was enough to shake even the most experienced detectives in the room. They had heard confessions before, but rarely had they encountered one so devoid of empathy or regret. In one final twist, Jared revealed that he had meticulously planned the entire incident, down to the location and the timing. He claimed that he had chosen Jenna-Rose at random, simply because he believed he could gain his trust and lure him out alone. To Jared, it was all a game, a horrifying act carried out purely for his own twisted satisfaction. By the end of the interrogation, law enforcement had pieced together the details of Gennaro's tragic final moments. They now had a full confession, physical evidence, and a clear timeline of events. The community, once filled with hope that Gennaro might be found alive, now faced the grim reality that one of their own had taken his life in cold blood. As investigators closed the book on the search for Gennaro, they found themselves grappling with a new, disturbing question. How could someone so young, so seemingly ordinary, commit an act so cruel, so devoid of any understandable motive? The answer, if there was one, remained locked in the mind of Jared Murray, a mind that, despite all efforts, left those around him haunted and forever changed. When the trial of Jared Murray began, the quiet town of Asher found itself thrust into the public eye. For many residents, the very idea of a young man they once knew standing accused of such a brutal crime was difficult to comprehend. They gathered outside the courthouse, hoping for answers, while reporters from across the region flocked to cover the case that had shocked an entire community. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense, heavy with the weight of the unimaginable. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out the chilling details of Gennaro Sanchez's final hours, relying heavily on Jared's own words to build their case. They played clips from his confession, the monotone recounting of his actions that left the jury visibly unsettled. Jurors shifted in their seats, expressions a mix of disbelief and horror as they listened to the defendant describe, in his own voice, how he had taken Gennaro's life with a sense of calm indifference. There was no emotion, no remorse, only a methodical retelling of a life extinguished. In his defense, Jared's lawyers attempted to argue that he was mentally unfit to stand trial. They brought in psychologists who claimed he suffered from severe mental health issues, arguing that he lacked the capacity to understand the gravity of his actions. They painted a picture of a disturbed young man whose detachment from reality rendered him incapable of fully comprehending the consequences of his crime. Yet, despite these claims, the prosecution countered with evidence that suggested otherwise, that Jared's actions were not born out of confusion but of chilling premeditation. The prosecution pointed to the methodical way in which Jared had carried out the murder, the planning, the execution, and the calculated manner in which he chose his victim. They argued that his decision to confess wasn't the result of a disturbed mind unable to grasp reality, but rather the actions of someone who was fully aware and disturbingly indifferent. They presented his calm, almost detached demeanor in the confession as proof of his deliberate intent, a move that left the defense struggling to counter. As the trial continued, the public's reaction grew more intense. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse daily, some carrying signs demanding justice for Gennaro, others simply there out of shock and curiosity. For the people of Asher, this case had become a mirror reflecting a part of their town they'd never known, a reminder that even in the most peaceful communities, darkness could hide in plain sight. Neighbors who had once passed Jared in the street now saw him as a stranger, a symbol of betrayal that had shaken their trust in one another. The media played a significant role in shaping public opinion. News outlets covered the trial extensively, replaying clips of Jared's confession that sent chills down viewers' spines. Stories circulated about the disturbing details of the murder, with headlines that captured the coldness of Jared's recounting, sparking debates across the country. Could someone so young, so seemingly ordinary, truly be capable of such calculated cruelty? It was a question that haunted those who followed the case. In the end, the jury's decision reflected the gravity of Jared's actions. After days of deliberation, they returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Jared's confession had been too compelling, his own words a stark testament to his intent. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his days behind bars, unable to harm anyone else. For Gennaro's family, it was a bittersweet moment, a sense of justice, though nothing could bring back their son. As Jared was led away, the courtroom fell silent, a somber end to a trial that had gripped an entire town. People whispered to one another, still struggling to make sense of it all. The confession had sealed his fate, a chilling reminder that sometimes the truth emerges not through dramatic revelations, but through an unsettling calm that cuts to the core. For the people of Asher, life would never quite return to the way it had been. Gennaro's death, and the trial that followed, left an indelible mark, a wound that time might heal but never erase. His family, though comforted by the verdict, carried a loss that words could never fill. And the community, once so certain of its safety, learned that even in the quietest of towns, shadows can linger just beneath the surface. The aftermath of Genaro Sanchez's murder left deep scars on the town of Asher. For a community that had always prided itself on its safety and close bonds, the tragic events had shaken its foundation. In the days and months following the trial, conversations in Asher's quiet streets, once light-hearted and familiar, often turned to hushed murmurs of sorrow, fear, and disbelief. The town found itself changed, no longer untouched by the harsh realities that had once felt so distant. Genaro's family bore the heaviest weight of the tragedy. Losing a son so young, and in such a horrific way, left an emptiness in their lives that would never truly fade. They tried to find solace in the fact that justice had been served, that Jared Murray would never again walk free, yet the knowledge did little to fill the void. The family faced each new day with resilience, honoring Genaro's memory in small, meaningful ways through community events, scholarships in his name, and quiet acts of kindness that reflected the person he had been. The case of Gerard Murray became a cautionary tale, not only for Asher but for communities far beyond its borders. For many, the trial and its outcome became a reason to discuss the importance of mental health awareness, of looking for warning signs that might otherwise go unnoticed. Gerard's detached demeanor, his fascination with violence, and the casual ease with which he had confessed all of it became a point of reflection for teachers, parents, and students alike. They asked themselves difficult questions. Could this have been prevented? Were there signs that had gone unnoticed? As for Jared Murray, his life now confined to a cell, he remained largely silent following his sentencing. News of him trickled out, occasionally a court appeal denied, a brief mention in a report, but for the most part, he disappeared from public consciousness. He had become a ghostly figure, a name spoken only in whispers, a reminder of the darkness that had momentarily pierced the community's peace. Those who knew him once had moved on, leaving behind any trace of association with the young man who had brought so much pain. The legacy of this case lingers like a shadow over Asher. To this day, people remember the December night that Genaro went missing, the following search, and the unthinkable truth that followed. Parents in town held their children a little closer, spoke a little more often about trust and caution. And the university, once a place of dreams for young students, became a place of remembrance for those who knew Genaro, his absence a quiet void that would never truly be filled. Genaro's story left Asher forever changed, a place no longer insulated from the crueler sides of human nature. And though life has gone on, though people still gather at the same cafes and stroll down the same streets, there's a quiet understanding among them, knowledge that, sometimes, the face of darkness is not that of a stranger, but of someone who seemed like one of their own. In reflecting on this tragedy, one cannot help but be reminded of the frailty of trust, and how a single, unexpected confession spoken without remorse had the power to expose hidden truths. For the people of Asher, Genaro's memory remains a solemn reminder that even in a world striving for peace, there will always be moments when the unthinkable reveals itself, reshaping lives in ways no one could have foreseen. The story of Genaro Sanchez and Jared Murray is one that left a profound mark on a small town, unraveling the illusion of safety that once defined it. In the end, a casual confession brought a killer to justice, but it also revealed the darker corners of the human mind, a reminder that evil can sometimes wear an ordinary face. Genaro's memory lives on in those who loved him, a light that won't be extinguished by the senseless act that took his life. If this story moved you, or if it left you with questions, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that delve into the mysteries of the human heart. Thank you for joining us, and remember, sometimes the truth emerges in ways we least expect.